You're listening to the Immortal Icons of Dance podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Johnson. Usually at the beginning of an episode, I will introduce you to an icon that we will focus on and give you background information on them. But this week, the icon is not a person, but a theater. The New York State Theater at Lincoln Center, to be exact, home of the New York City Ballet. It's currently operating under the name of the David H. Koch Theater, but most people I know affectionately still call it the State Theater. In April of 2024, the theater celebrated its 60th anniversary. Or more accurately, I celebrated its 60th anniversary and tried to convince other people to celebrate with me. To do this, I did a deep dive into the history of the theater and wrote a 22-part blog series on everything that I found, from the conception and design of the plaza to the construction and opening night of our beautiful theater in 1964. Did you know that George Balanchine and Lincoln Kirstein had creative input on the theater as well? I discovered so many incredible pictures and footage of the construction process, interesting facts about the art that adorns the theater, and first-hand accounts of the first performances that took place there. It would take me an hour to tell you everything that I learned, but you can read it all for yourself. Visit immortaliconsofdance.com/NYST. That's short for New York State Theater. Got it? Now it's time for me to introduce you to our guest today, who is here to talk about the theater. He's someone who knows it intimately, inside and out, Mr. Perry Silvey. Perry began working at the theater in 1977 at the age of about 29, and he's held many titles and positions over the course of 40 years there. He started out as an assistant stage manager during the last 5 years of Balanchine's life. He was also working during the last 20 years of Jerome Robbins' life. And finally, he retired as the technical director in 2019. He's also married to a former New York City Ballet dancer, Renee Estopanel, and you'll hear him mention her during our conversation. In 2013, Perry was honored with the Del Hughes Award for Lifetime Achievement in the Art of Stage Management. I can't wait for you to hear all the stories he shares from his unique backstage perspective of so many iconic ballets. In today's episode of the podcast, we are here talking with Perry Silvey to learn about his experience working at the New York State Theater under George Balanchine and with the New York City Ballet. Welcome, Perry.
Thank you. And I'm very glad to hear you call it the New York State Theater. I can't call it by that other name. It hurts. So
I understand.
Okay.
Could you tell me about your early career and how you got started in theater work?
In theater work, high school play, college plays. I was a math major in college, but I spent more time with the drama department and actually have a degree in acting from the University of Texas, but I put myself through college by working in the shop, the scene shop, the lighting shop. And by the time I finished college, I was as interested in technical theater as I was in acting. I was basically interested in theater in general, because at that school you studied choreography, you studied directing, you had to take dance classes, movement for actors, as well as theater history, costume history, everything, a little bit of everything. So in a way that was really a great preparation for being a stage manager, production manager, technical director, to understand both the performance side and the technical side. Mm-hmm. So that's how it started. And then I tried to do a little bit of acting. I was living in Salt Lake City, cooking in an Italian restaurant, when a stage manager job opened up with Repertory Dance Theater of Utah, modern dance company. I applied and got the job, and spent about a year and a half with that company, which was a wonderful little company. It was 6 men, 6 women. There was no artistic director. They did everything democratically. And they were very talented and did interesting things, their own choreography and other people's modern choreography. After that, I ended up doing a little more acting, a little of this stagehand work, whatever would keep me alive until I moved to New York. And I was working as a stagehand at the Met, the opera, night gang, where you come in, after the show in the evening and set up the rehearsals and performances for the next day on stage. But I got an interview with the Martha Graham Dance Company, which I thought was great. Well, it happened that two of the dancers from the Utah company had by then moved to New York and were dancing for Martha. And so I sort of had references. I got the job, stage manager for Martha Graham. After a few months, I became production stage manager. So I was with her for about a year and a half, almost 2 years also. And loved it. I love her ballets. I love her work. It was a difficult time for the company. Martha was choreographing. But she'd been through hell and then come back and restarted the company in a way. And so it was a fascinating time for me to get to know her. It was really amazing.
Yeah.
Another icon of dance, right?
Yeah.
So, well, during the time I was working for her, she hired Ronnie Bates, who was New York City Ballet's lighting designer, production manager, technical director, to do some lighting for a new ballet of hers. That's also where I met Robert Irving, because he would conduct for her sometimes. And so Ronnie came over and I met him and worked with him, and Martha needed to set up a new production department, and so she wanted Ronnie to help her do that. Well, Ronnie found this guy who was working for Twyla, who was going to come and take over, and he warned me. I said I'd probably be out of a job because the new guy needed to choose his own people. But at the last minute, he backed out. So there was a little 2-week American tour coming up, and it was just me. And Ronnie came along, and we really got to know each other then, because when you're on the road like that, you find out what people are really made out of.
Yeah.
You find out. And so he found out what I was made out, and I found out what he was like. And later on, after a year and a half, he invited me to join New York City Ballet. Well, at the time, I was ready to leave Martha. There were a lot of problems with the company. I don't think I need to go into all of them. I think everybody knows the name Ron Protas, and he was a very difficult person to deal with at the time. So I was ready to leave Martha, and I thought about it for a long time, actually. Because I thought about doing some Broadway stage managing. And I had a good friend who was a Broadway stage manager, and so I talked to him about it for a long time. And when it came down to it, he said, do not join New York City Ballet. And I'll tell you why, he said, because New York City Ballet is Jerry Robbins. And Jerry Robbins eats stage managers for breakfast. Don't go there. I was like, whoa, okay. I didn't know much about Jerry Robbins, but he did. And I thought about it. But then, I started seeing some of the company. The first time Ronnie brought me in, the first thing I ever saw New York City Ballet do was a John Terrace piece called Daphnis and Chloe. And it was embarrassingly bad, to me at least. I mean, they were dressed up in leather stuff. The boys were trying to look butch. The girls were doing whatever. And I was like, is this the great choreography he's been talking about? Well, luckily I stayed for 4 teas. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, this is something. And so when I really started looking at the choreography, most of all, I thought, no, this is too interesting to pass up. Just too interesting. I would have stayed with Martha if things had gone easier, probably. But I didn't, Broadway didn't interest me that much because once you set up a show, you do the same thing over and over and over and over. I get enough of that at Nutcracker, New York City Ballet, but much more interesting to have mixed repertory. And so I decided to come. Well, Ronnie had a hard time actually getting me hired because at that time the production department was Ronnie, who was everything. Lighting designer, production manager, technical director, production stage manager, any title you wanted to give, he was the head. Kevin Tyler was a stage manager, and he wasn't a very good one, but he did good paperwork and he was okay. And Roland Vasquez, ex-dancer, who was shoe man and assistant stage manager. Well, Betty Cage, who was, who that was, told Ronnie, well, you don't need a fourth person. You're doing fine with three. Well, he did need a fourth person. He was so overworked, and there was so much going on that he really did. And it was Lincoln and Mr. B that's told Betty, no, Ronnie needs more help. And so, luckily, I was the guy who came along.
How old were you at the time?
I guess I was 29.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be about right. And I came in as assistant stage manager, so that was my first job. I was supposed to start in the winter season of '76, but the orchestra went on strike. And so I was told wait, and I came in January, right after Nutcracker. So that's when I started. So, I mean, that first year, '77, Vienna waltzes, all this stuff coming on. He'd just done Yuji Jack the year before. So anyway, I was there when he choreographed all the stuff after that, after Vienna waltzes. David's Wundertänzer and Ballo della Regina and all the festivals that we did and all that. So I was there, I guess you would say, for the last 7 years of Mr. B's life. And he wasn't around much that last year. And I was there for the last 22 years of Jerry's life. So I became pretty close to him, and he did not eat me for breakfast. He ended up trusting me a lot, actually, which was gratifying. Yeah. Because Jerry knew a lot about technical theater. He knew a lot about everything. And he was very particular about everything, as I think everybody can tell you. So for him to accept me and end up trusting me was a very nice vote of confidence. I think Mr. B did too, although we didn't know each other as well. But I certainly gradually was moved up to stage manager, and then after Ronnie died in '86, I took over the production department as, I guess my first title was probably production stage manager. At one point I was called director of production, I think. I don't know, titles didn't mean anything. Everybody knew what you did. Yeah. And then when I gave the job over to Marguerite, and she became the head, I stayed on for a while as technical director. That was the title. And we had probably one of the most seamless transitions you could imagine over like 6 years span. I stayed around. She took over, but we worked together. We had great trust with each other, and I was very happy to not wait until I was Biden's age to pass things on. So anyway, I was happy with that.
Yeah. So going back to your first time in the theater, and you saw Four T's. Do you remember? So that was your first impression of the company and the choreography. What was your first impression of the theater, of the building?
Oh, I just thought it was beautiful to start with. Just really lovely. And the promenade is like no other place. The stage, compared to the stages I've been working on with Martha Larger, as is what Mr. B wanted, of course. The floor was pretty amazing because it did have some give, and I didn't know much about floors then. Later on, I became kind of a floor expert, but that was my first real knowledge of the basket weave type of floor for dancers. The equipment was at that point state of the art, and now we look back on it and it's almost laughable how primitive it was. But at that point, it was very well equipped. And some anomalies, some odd things, the orchestra pit, not quite great. The acoustics, a little bit odd, which of course over the years got worked on, and now they're so much better than they were. And the orchestra pit is bigger, and all those things. And technically, we had a huge renovation. We got a whole new electrical system. Over the years, we've upgraded the lighting equipment. The fly system has been maintained very, very well. And so it's a great working theater. Some companies come in used to the Met or even larger places, and they have to squeeze a little. A lot of companies come in used to smaller theaters, and they kind of revel in the space and the ability. So it's a great, great theater. Mm-hmm. I think it's one of the finest, and especially now, it's truly the premier dance theater of the world. Mm-hmm. When it comes down to it, and I've worked in almost all of them. Of course, you can look at Paris Opera, you can look at, Mariinsky and the Bolshoi and Royal Opera House. I've worked in all these places, but nothing's like the New York State Theater.
Yeah, one of my favorite places to be.
Yeah.
All right, so now I want to know, for those who might not be very familiar with what a stage manager, a production stage manager does, could you talk about what are some of the responsibilities that you have in the theater?
Well, I guess you start with we run the show. The stage manager is calling cues to the light board, to the sound board, to the follow spots, to the fly floor, to the deck people, coordinating every move, whether it's a lighting move, a scenery move. And leading up to that has been running tech rehearsals also. That's the stage manager. Now there's a lot of side jobs to that, of course, the paperwork, the keeping records, because especially in a repertory company, you do a new ballet and maybe you do it for 3 seasons and it doesn't come back for 3 years or 4 years. Well, listen, after 3 or 4 years, you can't remember. If it's not written down well, you can't reproduce it, really well. So it's a very important job to keep records of the hanging, the lighting, all of those things. Mm-hmm. We're responsible for the upkeep of the theater. The production manager heads the whole production staff, which has changed over the years, but basically now there's a resident lighting designer, Mark Stanley, who was my first hire in '86, but he's still there, wonderful man. There's a lighting director who works there when Mark's not there and he's in charge. There's often a lighting assistant, there's sometimes an intern, there's one or two assistant stage managers, there's a technical director now also, and Marguerite is the head of that whole staff. Mm-hmm. Now we, as the productions team, the staff, don't do actual focusing of lights or laying the floor. We direct the crew. Mm-hmm. The crew at the New York State Theater is Local 1 IATSE crew, great crew, wonderful people. I hear people go on about, union crew. The union crew can be wonderful, I'll tell you that. When you hang a 500-pound piece of scenery over your head, and it's going to be over your dancers' heads, it's going to fly out for most of the time, would you rather have that hung by, a high school kid who doesn't know anything, or a professional union guy who knows exactly what he's doing? Well, it's an obvious choice, right? Now, it's not to say there aren't some good non-union stagehands, but overall, I've had great luck, not just luck, great experiences with the Local 1 crew at the New York State Theater. So we direct them. We work with the costume people. We do scheduling.
Could you tell me more? So I learned about this a few years ago. Could you tell me more about how programming a whole season is tied to, what fits, what doesn't? Can you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, it starts with whoever's doing the programming, Jonathan or Peter or Mr. B, says these are the ballets I want to try to do next season, let's say. And start plugging them in. They used to have this wonderful chart on the wall in one of the rooms up on the 4th floor. And you'd start plugging things in and seeing how. And eventually you come up with a season, however many ballets, how they're spaced out. And then you start handing it around. You hand it to the music department. And they say, well, wait, we can't do those 6 ballets during that 1 week because we don't have enough rehearsal time. So if you can move that ballet to the next week, or little things like that, or whatever. Or this program has no orchestra. It's piano and it's a small group. Don't you want an orchestra? Well, sometimes maybe they don't, but at least those are the things they're looking at. They bring it to the production department, and we say, we cannot do that ballet, and that ballet during the same week because they're all such heavy scenically that we can't have them all hanging at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so if you could just move that one to another week, we can handle those two. I'm not making perfect sense, but I think you understand what I'm saying is that each department says, these are our problems with what you proposed. And it goes back and forth, until every department has had a certain amount of say.
How long does it take to all that back and forth to program a season?
Sometimes it may take a month, it may take 6 weeks even or more. Mm-hmm. It depends. It's different every time, but you try to start early enough that everybody has a chance to have their say. Mm-hmm. It doesn't always work, and then there can be changes, and sometimes after we've known each other for 20 years, sometimes Peter would hand me the sheet and say, don't say anything, I already know what you're going to say. Because we've done it together so many times. Yeah. He knew the problems with Vienna waltzes, how much scenery had to be hanging, and other ballets. So sometimes he learned enough to hardly need to ask. Yeah. And he knew the same about the music department in many ways. Not always, not everything, but he was pretty smart about laying things out and how they got put together. Mm-hmm. So it's a cooperative effort, as everything in the theater is. None of us is there on our own. None of us could do anything, no matter how big a star you are, no matter how wonderful a ballerina you are. You're not going to look very good if the lights aren't on you.
Right.
So, that's obvious. But it's also something that I learned right away. I knew in theater. This is something every theater person really knows. It's a team effort. But I knew this so strongly, and it's one of the reasons I love being in New York City Ballet. The first season I was there, I guess it was the winter of '77. The last program ended. Dancers all pack up their things and leave. The orchestra's gone. It's just the stagehands taking down scenery, folding it up, putting it away, taking down lights, just the technicians and the stagehands. And we're doing that, and I see Mr. B come down from the 4th floor, and he's going around shaking the hands of the stagehands, saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's like, yes, that man knows. That man is smart, and he knows what it takes. And he asked a lot of people, but he gave a lot, and he was aware a lot too. So he was an amazing man. Never be another one like him, I would think. But so what a privilege and an honor to have been able to know him a little bit.
Yes.
And to see.
What could you say about both Balanchine and Robbins? Something you learned from them as men of the theater makers, something that you learned that you take with you going forward in your job?
I would have to say a lot of things, but the first thing that comes to mind with Mr. B is Put everything you have into it. Do the very best you can. Work hard. Go for it. And then accept that that's the best you could have done and just start over. Don't kick yourself. It would be like, I felt like that was his attitude. He would push and do, I want more, I want this, I want this. And then once it was done, he wasn't going to harangue, and he wasn't going to say, you should have done this, or why didn't you do this, or whatever. It was just, okay, now we go on. That's freeing, really. And it frees you to try things and to work really hard, too. I would guess the dancers, many of them probably felt the same way. It's like, okay, I know I can't do it perfectly, but I'm going to give it everything I've got, and then that'll be it. I'll be okay, and I'll do even better the next time. You know. From Jerry, I learned a few things not to do, maybe, which I already knew, that yelling at people doesn't work and doesn't really, and micromanaging, which I never completely learned because I sometimes micromanaged a little too much, but it's hard to not to do when you've done every job in the theater, because I've been a follow spot operator, I've been an assistant, I've been a carpenter, I've done all those jobs. So you're the head of all these people that are doing these jobs that you know how to do also. Mm-hmm. Well, it's a great advantage, but you have to tell yourself, no, but they have to do it. So, anyway, but from Jerry was brilliant at timing. I learned more about calling cues from Jerry, maybe than anybody, because from him I could see the difference between calling it then and then. Now, of course, you're working with the lighting designer and him, but he was very particular about how he wanted his ballets to look and how he wanted the transitions in them to happen. So you call a light cue, or one of my favorite ballets of all to call is Glass Pieces, because there's those wonderful blackouts and things that if you do it just like he wanted it, it's like not just right, but surprisingly right.
Yeah.
So
I have chills just hearing you talk about that. I love Glass Pieces. I'm so glad that it was back last season. And there was a night that Philip Glass was in the audience in the spring, and it was right next to where I was working. So I got to watch him watch the ballet, and that was.
And he didn't frown.
He was pretty deadpan the whole time, but it was still special to me to be right there next to him.
Of course. Oh, some of the people who have come into that theater. It's amazing, the list of people we've worked with, and pretty cool.
Last winter, I was sitting right at the end of R101, and I was sitting right next to Peter while he's watching his Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's Peter, and Darcy's on the other side of him. And,
sure.
Yeah. Could you share any? I'm pretty familiar with the front of house area as an usher. But the backstage is complete mystery to me. Is there any little known fact or, anomaly of the theater that people might find interesting to know?
It's hard for me to say because I know it so well.
Right.
So sometimes you bring people backstage and they're like, oh, I thought the Nutcracker tree was much deeper.
Right.
Little things like that. Or this is the snow. That's what it is. It's paper,
right.
Whatever. I don't know. In many ways, I love it that people don't know a lot about what goes back there. I mean, it's wonderful when people are aware of the lighting or aware of design or whatever. But to really have them forget about all that and be able to focus on the music and the dancer. That's a big part of our job, really, is to get the distractions out of the way so that not only distractions from the dancers so they can focus, so you make the floor clean and you make it a good floor. You give them clear entrances, you rehearse and space them in the right way so that they're ready and they don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. But you're doing the same thing for the audience in a way too. You make the black legs as flat and clean as possible so that your eye doesn't accidentally notice them. Now, some people will say, well, what does it matter? That's just black on the side. This means nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But unconsciously, if they look a little crooked, or if they're a little, you may not point afterwards and say, oh, those legs were crooked.
Mm-hmm.
But there would be something just a little bit less than clear or elegant,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever it is you want the stage to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so trying to do all that, there's an old saying about when you're putting scenery together quickly and you're measuring how high it should be and all this, and you say, oh, look, that's close enough for rock and roll. That's an old expression. So in other words, for rock and roll, you got lights everywhere and mess and cables and all this stuff. For us, we want it clean. We don't want to see that stuff. We want it to be more focused. We want the designers, the lighting and costume and scenic designers, to be able to focus your eye. In other words, we want to control in a way. And of course, the choreography does the same thing. Good choreography shows you where to look in many ways, right? Mm-hmm. Well, we're trying to get all the other stuff out of the way so that they can do their job even clearer and better. So that's one of the things we're trying to do. The backdrop shouldn't have a bunch of wrinkles. Not because you're going to say, oh, the backdrop is wrinkled, although you might, but it's just that one less thing that could be less than perfect or less than, be a little distracting in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way I saw some of my job, was to make it as smooth as possible for the orchestra, for the dancers, for the audience. And a stage manager in a way does that for the stagehands too. When you're calling cue to the follow spot, you want to say the fewest words possible to them to make it the most clear to them, so that they're not worried that you don't know where you are, or that they know what they're going to do, and they will do it better because you've been clear.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's part of the stage manager's job when they're calling cues.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it transfers to everybody.
Could you tell me, in Duo Concertant, with the very, very,
Mm-hmm.
very specific spotlight, talk about how that's even able to be pulled off. How is that coordinated?
It's tricky. It's very tricky because I've done that ballet in many, many theaters with a lot of different follow spot operators. And every place I go, I did it at Royal Opera House, I did it at ABT, all the follow spot operators where you go say, oh yeah, I described to them, oh, I can do that, no problem. You set up for the first rehearsal and they're like, whoa, wait a second. It's not as easy as I thought.
Mm-hmm.
It is tricky because you have to have a mark. Now, in our theater, we happen to have in the follow spot booth a chart up on the wall. If you're the follow spot operator here and you're looking at the stage, the chart is in front of you up here.
Okay.
There's a pinhole of light from the lamp that he's pointing that goes up onto there. And so they have marked the stage up there.
Oh.
So that pinhole goes to this point, and you know that your lamp is pointing down left. And it goes up there, and you know your lamp is pointing up top. It may not be absolutely precise in every case, but it gives you a really good idea.
Mm-hmm.
So that when I tell them there's a dancer entering upstage right, they can be ready because they can see. I mean, they know approximately anyway. Now, in Duo Concertant, it's even more specific. We end up, first of all, they know how small to make the iris, about an 18-inch iris, and they're, 150 feet away or more. That's pretty tricky.
Mm-hmm.
But we get the dancer there, they put the lamp right where it should be with the necklace and around, we call it the necklace,
Mm-hmm.
and then they put a mark on their chart.
Mm-hmm.
The other foot spot is also an 18-inch circle, and they have the dancer or I put my foot where the dancer foot will be. Follow spot puts their lamp there, and then they have a mark there. So they have a mark for the head spot and the foot spot. And sometimes both of them do.
Mm-hmm.
And often I will do that before the dancers even show up. I'll give them the marks because I know how tall the dancer is. I know where the foot goes, so we can be ahead of the game. Then the dancers come, and usually we ask them to double check, and we will often go through that last movement without music, just to make sure the marks are correct. Where the female dancer stands, we pick her up, we follow her hand away from her face, we follow her hand back to include her face, and then this lamp stays there. She ducks out of it. The man puts his hand into the light. Now he can see the shadow on the stage. So the light's coming from there. That's where her head was. But he's over here. So he puts his hand into that light. He sees exactly by that. And then he gradually puts his head up into that light. And then the false spot opens up gradually. Anyway, we have all that rehearsed and rehearsed. And then on the day of the actual rehearsal with musicians, we run the first 4 movements fairly quickly because we might stop for notes and things. And then we run the last movement at least 2 or 3 times, just to get everybody confident in it. And so it's a lot of rehearsal, and it's a little bit of a theatrical trick.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's so relatively simple as far as like what is entailed, but it definitely creates theater magic every time.
Oh, it's wonderful. I love that ballet so much.
Yeah.
And 2 of the best follow spot operators I ever had. I did this for Kay and her husband Albert at a school, and I think Darcy and Nikolai came to dance it, and I went to do the lighting. Well, this is a school. There were like 2 16-year-old girls running the follow spot. They were so into it. They were so good. I was like,
wow.
Yeah, you don't have to be whatever. Anyway, I will never forget those 2 young ladies. They were wonderful.
That's so cool.
But I've had great follow spot operators in a lot of places. And we had some really good ones at the State Theater, for sure. You know, speaking of that, when they did Vienna Waltzes, you know, the last section with Suzanne coming out alone, the first way Mr. B tried that was her dancing with a follow spot. It was going to be just her and the follow spot, and they were going to dance together. It didn't really quite work out, and he ended up changing it and added the partner and all that stuff. But I thought that was a kind of cool idea.
Yeah.
It was kind of an interesting idea. Didn't do that, but he was very into his lighting. He trusted Ronnie a lot, but he very much knew what he wanted. And he wanted it clear and clean most of the time. I mean, you know, you look at Aziana, and there's some special effects, and there's Horton Superior with effects and stuff. So it's not that he didn't do effects, but most of his ballet is almost like the costume. He wanted to simplify, make it the right atmosphere, and okay, this is totally beside the point, but I have to tell this story because Mozartiana. We're lighting Ronnie is doing the lighting, but I'm sitting there beside him, Mr. B, and they're lighting the first section, Preghiera, the prayer with the little girls. And it's sort of cool and bluish and lovely, and Mr. B tells Ronnie, bring up the amber footlights. And it's like a color from nowhere. It says he brings up the amber footlight. It looks very strange to me, completely out of character and stuff. And he looks at it for a little while, and he said, no, take them out. And it just finally occurred to me that what that looked like to him was the old time footlights that were gaslight or were floaters, because that's the warm color. And he was just trying that look. I just connected that moment with theater history for a second.
Yeah. Because
I felt like, I know where that comes from. That's from back when theaters were lit by gaslight.
Wow.
Anyway, sorry, that's completely off the subject.
I'm interested in any stories that pop into your mind.
Too many.
So you said Glass Pieces is one of your favorite anytime it would come back. What are some other ballets that would, you'd see them programmed and they would excite you, or are there any that you would see on the schedule and you would dread for whatever reason?
Dread.
That laugh tells me you've got an answer.
Well, we did make up a list once of the worst ballets ever done at the York City Ballet.
Uh-huh.
But I don't think it's right for me to show you that list.
Uh-huh.
Of course, there was one Mr. B ballet, which I never saw. It was his airport ballet.
Oh,
Pantig.
Yeah.
Pantig. I think everybody assumed that was one of the worst. But the one that I loved. This may sound odd, but one of my favorites was Jerry Robbins' Four Seasons. But one of the reasons for that is that was the first ballet that I ever stage managed all the way through, from beginning to end. Before that, Ronnie would call the first performance or two, and then I would take over at some point. But that was the first one I went, and part of the reason was that Jerry brought in Jennifer Tipton to light it. And Ronnie, that way, had other things he could do because he wasn't being the lighting designer for that. So he put me out there with them. So I have a very warm place in my heart for that because, first of all, I think it's a great ballet. It's hilarious and wonderful. But also because personally, that was there. My list of great ballets. When Serenade comes up, I don't care how many times I've seen it. It's beautiful. It's just, Concerto Buco. Can you beat that? Is there a better ballet in the world? Well, Agon. Yeah, Agon. That's almost like at the very top of my list of any ballet ever. For some reason, there's just something about Agon. Well, maybe it's partly because I always saw Renee dancing in it, but that's only part of it. It's also a great ballet. I don't know. So many ballets that I say I welcome. And there's some that I would look at, and here's an example, Prodigal Son. When I would see it on the schedule, I was going, oh, okay, we've done it. And then it would come and I would be like, oh yeah, I love it. But it somehow, and that would happen with some others too. And some of Peter's ballets, when his Romeo and Juliet comes around, I love it. Of course, I was a big part of helping make it.
Yeah.
Too, and the same with his Swan Lake and Sleeping Beauty, most of all, because Sleeping Beauty was a pretty amazing project for that time. It was, Mr. B had talked about doing Sleeping Beauty, but it was Lincoln who decided that we were really going to do it. It was Lincoln that went to David Mitchell and had him design an entire set for it. And one day, Ronnie Bates and I were up at David Mitchell's studio. He designed Broadway scenery. He did a lot of design for a lot of things. And we were at his studio and looking at something else. He was designing, I think, for Joe Duell or something. And he said, come over here. And he came over and there was this beautiful model. And we were looking at it and said, oh, that's beautiful. What is it? And he said, oh, that's your Sleeping Beauty. Ronnie and I were both like, what? We had no idea that he'd been working on it. We had no idea. Lincoln had used his own money, I think, some of his own money to get it started. Well, when it finally got time to do it, we had to redo his design and start over in a way, although a lot of things were there. His original design could not have fit in the theater. It was impossible. But he was famous for that. He once built some scenery for a Broadway show and oversaw seeing it in the shop, and it was all built, came on the truck to the Broadway theater, and it was too big to get in the door. That's like a pretty obvious, but that's because David thought big.
Yeah.
And he didn't think about he needed somebody like me to do the details.
Right.
And that's what we did too. And that's what the technical director does. You get a designer who has these grand ideas, and you have to say, okay, this is how we can do it, this wonderful idea, within our repertory system, within our theater, within the time we have. Well, Sleeping Beauty hit every one of those marks. That was the biggest thing we'd ever done, bigger than Nutcracker, bigger. And it was amazing. It was, and I love that, I have to admit.
Mm-hmm.
I really love the way he put it together. I had to fight to make the boat as small as it is. Now that's a big boat.
Mm-hmm.
David Mitchell insisted it had to be like 4 feet longer, and if it was any smaller, it would look dinky.
Mm-hmm.
I had to go back and forth between Lincoln and David, and we finally made another model of a slightly smaller ship, and they all looked at it and said, "Oh, that's fine." But that's what a technical director has to do sometimes, is bring it back to reality. Even working with Paul McCartney, when we were looking at the scenery and the ideas we were going to do for his ballet, at one point in our discussions I said, well, we could do that, but it would cost another $1 million. And he kind of looked at me and, oh, okay, that's right. He said, you know, when I tour, I have a guy just like you. He's the guy that says, stop there. We're not going any farther than that. So the voice of reality.
Yeah.
Whatever. Anyway, it was nice to know he had to do the same thing. With all the money he has, there's still points that you have to say, okay, you can't quite go that far.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, don't.
Now you're getting me going.
Oh, that's what we're here for. Do you want to take a break for a second?
No.
Okay. You don't have to divulge your opinion on a least favorite ballet, but from a technical standpoint, a ballet that's the most difficult or most strenuous on the backstage.
Yeah, well, double feature comes close. Double feature was
Familiar with that one?
Susan Stroman's 2-act ballet with, you never saw double feature?
No.
Yeah? Robin Wagner designed the scenery, and when Peter told me that Susan Stroman was going to do a ballet for us, he said, I told her, just make it a small ballet. It'll be full length, but make it simple. So one day I was called down to Robin Wagner's studio, and Susan was there and Robin, and they bring out this model, and I'm like, this is not a simple ballet. This has a house that has to move out here, and has projections and moving images, and this has to move in. It was almost built for a Broadway show, except in Broadway you could put things in and out because you could have tracks in the stage. We can't have tracks because we have to have dancers dancing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a tough one. But we made it, and we made it work. And even the damn dog. It has a dog.
Really?
You know, dog's the only thing anybody ever wanted to talk about that ballet. It was a fun ballet. It was fun, but the dog is in the second act, and it was pretty funny, but it was sort of funny to me that all this other stuff's going on, but all anybody noticed was the dog. That's why they tell old-time actors, say, don't act with children and dogs, you know, you'll get upstaged.
Right.
We were upstaged by we've been upstaged by donkeys sometimes, right? Union Jack,
Oh, yeah.
of course. In Don Q, there was a horse, and each of them had their own problems.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we need to go into them. But as far as the ones that are taxing, Nutcracker's a big show, you know, Nutcracker's huge. But once it's up, then it goes smoothly. It's a lot of stagehands.
Mm-hmm.
But it's Sleeping Beauty, huge. Midsummer Night's Dream used to be even bigger than it is.
How so?
Because when they first moved it to State Theater, they redid the scenery, and it was all this really hard, heavy stuff that he did. After first season or two, he redid some of it, this is David Hayes, to make it soft scenery so that we could do it in rep. Because when I first came, this summer had to be done a week by itself. You couldn't do other ballets in rep with it. Then we remade it so that it could be done in rep. But it used to be a big one. Like Nutcracker, you can't do anything else while you have Nutcracker hanging. It's just, there's no way. But at this point, Sleeping Beauty and Nutcracker, maybe the only two that you really have to do without any kind of rep.
Mm-hmm.
There are some heavy ballets that you have to do simpler rep along with them. But those are the two biggest. And if you add in the double feature.
Mm-hmm. So during your time, Nutcracker had already been an annual production for about 20 some years by the time.
Well, State Theater
30-some.
64
Yeah.
was its first year. So it had been going for 12 years by the time I got there.
So things were pretty well, a well-oiled machine, I would assume. But what were
Pretty
some
well, yeah.
improvements, maybe, or some changes or some updates that were made during your time with the production?
The only thing of Nutcracker that changed was very early. It was either that first year, 77 or 78, and Mr. B had Robbins make a new backdrop for Act 2.
Mm.
The original one had the Candy Mountain.
I like that
But-
one.
And
Do you know why? No?
no idea. I have no idea why, but he changed it to the fruit and nut doily.
Mhm.
I mean, the doilies were there already, but then he made the backdrop go a little better with the rest of the
Mm-hmm.
theater. Other than that, hardly anything has changed in Nutcracker. We've had to redo it, a new scrim, and we're probably on the fourth scrim since 1964.
Oh.
They only last however many, 10 years or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And the same with other drops have had to either be repainted or remade. But as far as, we would not change the design. We would not even think of that.
Mhm.
That's Robbins' design that Mr. B left us with. We wouldn't even think of starting over.
No. What about, I bet you have a lot of stories like this, moments that your heart stops while you're backstage seeing something that happened.
Well, speaking of glass pieces, Ronnie called it the opening, first few performances, and then I started calling it. And I was calling it for another season or something. And then we came, and Ronnie said, I haven't called it in a while. I'd like to. I said, sure, I'd love to, because I'd love to see it again from the front. So when you're calling it, you have a very particular view of a ballet. So it's great to be able to go. So that performance, I went out for glass pieces, and I'm out there at the back of the orchestra, and Ronnie's calling it, and we get to the blackout at the end of the second movement, and the lights come up, and nothing happens. The dancer doesn't enter, the boys run in, the orchestra. Pretty soon you hear Hugo in the pit saying, "That's all well and good, but we don't have any lights." So of course I'm out there, I can do nothing. I'm like,
Oh my God.
oh. Anyway, that was the moment.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
was definitely a moment. They finally fixed it, and
Was the audience like shocked silence, or did they laugh?
they laughed.
Okay.
When Hugo yelled,
Yeah.
they laughed. When things go wrong, audiences will gasp or whatever, but it almost focuses their attention more. If a dancer slips and falls, sometimes that focuses their performance, and if they can get up, you watch the rest of their performance and there's this extra energy or something. And I think the same thing happens sometimes to the audience, that this is not normal. Oh, we're used to something, and this is something not normal.
Well, it reminds you that you're in a live theater,
Yes.
because it can definitely sometimes feel in the audience, on the other side of the footlights, it can sometimes feel like a screen. It's
Yeah.
a movie, it's a whatever. Everything seems so perfect up there. So
And we want it to be about perfect, but
Yeah,
it is live theater, so
Yeah.
it happens.
yeah.
And so the worst moments, of course, were injuries. Jean-Pierre Lafou went down horrible. Ricky Weiss landed and tore his Achilles. Mendy Roy went down in Stars and Stripes and was crawling toward me, I'm sure the audience saw my hand come out and pull her off stage. I ended up carrying her to Paul Simon's limousine. She was dating him at the time. And he took her to the hospital. It's like, those are the moments that you just go, oh,
Wow.
this is so horrible.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know what it means to the dancer. And
Yeah.
You're not thinking of, oh, this has ruined the performance. You're thinking of the dancer,
Right.
of course. The hell with the performance at that moment. Of course, you can find a way to go on, find a way to. I think there was once, I can't remember which ballet, it was a Jerry Robbins ballet, that we had to stop. We had to send someone down the pit and say, he can't go on, we're going to skip that section, this is what we'll do.
Oh, wow.
You know, I can't remember which ballet it was, but it happens occasionally, and you just have to be adaptable, adjust, react. You have to be alert, of course, because things can happen. Certainly there have been odd moments in scene changes. There was one really weird moment in Sleeping Beauty. After the kiss and they all go, there's a huge transition with scenery flying out, scenery flying in slowly, and then people coming on and stuff. Well, the big columns flying in. We had one of our young dancers who was over by the rail, and he felt this rope behind him moving. Well, it was the guy upstairs pulling on the rope to bring these columns in, but he didn't realize that. And he panicked. And he was like, stage hand guy, this rope is moving. And he grabbed the rope. He tried to stop. Well, the guy upstairs doesn't know that's what's happening. So they're doing a tug of war. The guy upstairs is trying to bring it in, and he's trying to hold it back. And finally, somebody comes and pushes him away, and the stuff comes in. Too late. The guy that brings the chair out, put it in the wrong place, the column hit the thing, and goes a little like this. At the same time, the prince and princess are supposed to be entering, and she's not there. He enters, she's nowhere to be found. He goes downstage, he goes back up, and finally she comes on. I mean, it was just like, I'll bet the audience, half of them didn't even realize anything was wrong. But for us, it was like, oh my God, how embarrassing, how horrible, how... So, yeah, it's happened. It happens, and there are moments. The worst moment probably happened when there were no dancers around and we were on stage striking. There was a new sonongula set that had a big heavy wall, and someone on the fly floor made a mistake and it came crashing down. Crashing. And luckily no one was hurt. The two of the places where the pipes were tied together, because it was so heavy, it needed 3 pipes tied together. They came apart, 2 of the pipes went flying up to the grid, and we lost them for the rest of the season. It was horrible. It just looked like a bomb had hit. Like I say, luckily no one was hurt.
Was there damage to the set or the stage?
Oh yeah, that part of the set was trash.
Oh.
Totally trash. We had to redesign and rebuild for the next season. For that one, it was gone. It was just, all the rest of the set was fine, but that one wall was trashed. It was just trashed. That was a terrible moment. That was, and especially because you don't know for sure if anybody's been hurt right away. That's the first thing you look for. But luckily, no one was. We dodged a bullet on that one.
Yeah.
I don't know. I used to talk to, little school groups that would come through and I'd bring them up on stage. And I would ask them if they had questions. And invariably their questions would be about what disasters have happened. Does anything ever fall down? Is it, because I don't know, these were kids that were watching movies or whatever. That's what they wanted to know. But all I could say is we worked very, very hard to try to make sure nothing like that ever happens. I mean, it's a big responsibility, actually. You've got a lot of danger possibilities. So you double and you triple check and you use engineers to make sure that the right weight is correct and make sure that the shot builds correctly so that all those things can happen. So that's a part of our responsibility that we take quite seriously.
What is the proudest moment in your career?
The proudest moment in my career.
Whether it was in the moment, going, I can't believe we just pulled that off, or looking back, going, I'm really proud to have been a part of that production.
There's a lot of those. There's quite a few places that I would say, looking back, we did a good job. I'm really happy. I mean, I've said that after Double Feature. Even Robert Wagner came and said, I wasn't sure anybody could do what you just did, and that was a great compliment. But I felt the same way. I was like, this team did a great job. And I felt that very often. At the end of the American Music Festival, that was nearly killed a lot of us. And to finish that and feel like it wasn't about whether the ballets were any good, it was the fact that we survived it, that we made it happen, that we made this impossible situation happen. I have to admit, I felt fairly proud of that. I felt really proud when we put Romeo and Juliet on the stage, and I know most people don't like it. I know that. They don't like the scenery, they don't like the costumes. I love them. To me, they show the abstraction in such a beautiful way. Now, I'm prejudiced because I worked with Peter and Pierre Kirkabue and Mark Stanley on developing that whole thing, and they were such a great team. When you have a design team that respects each other, everyone is free to mention things, everyone has respect for each one, and you have, it's a creative heaven, and that's what that was. So, yes, I'm prejudiced about that, but I do love that one. I also have one kind of odd little moment that has always stuck with me. We had a dancer named Yepim Mitskov, and his father happened to be the technical director at the Tivoli Theater, no, not the Tivoli Theater, the Royal Theater in Copenhagen. And he came once to see a performance, to see his son. And I'd met him, and afterwards he came back, and he came to me and said, "Your black legs were so nice and straight and flat." I was like, yes! Nobody would ever notice that except another technical director, right? So I was like, thank you. That's like a nod from your peer.
Yeah.
So that's a special. I guess receiving the Del Hughes Stage Manager Association Award was similar in that that's voted on by your peers, other stage managers. So to be given that Lifetime Achievement Award was very special because it was from people who know what your job is, who know your reputation, who have worked with you maybe. So that was a moment. I don't know. There's a lot of moments I'm so lucky about, so happy about. I could keep going for a long time, but that's enough.
Okay. To clarify, because we've talked about it a couple times now, for listeners who might not be familiar, when we refer to black legs,
that's the black masking scenery on the side of the stage that's vertical. You have black borders, which is at the top that go across. You have the black legs on the side. That's what makes your
the wings or the curtains.
They're the wings, the wings and the top. And then behind that, you usually have a backdrop. You have the proscenium downstage of that, but we have a portal which is also black legs and border. So yes, you're making a large doorway through which you see the stage.
All right, I have one last question for you.
Uh-oh.
If you were teaching a master class to stage managers, what would be the biggest lesson that you would want to pass on to people who are beginning their careers in theater?
Wow. I don't know if I can limit it to one thing.
We've got time.
But I would say learn everything you can about everything. If you're going to be a stage manager, you need to read music. You need to know something about costumes so that you can talk to the costume department. You need to know technical theater. You need to take dance classes. You need to know what the dancers are experiencing. You need to be able to have real empathy with everybody that's on the team. And as a stage manager, you're the coordinator of this team often. So the more you know about every part of the team, including music, including everybody, including choreography, what's the choreographer going through? What is it they want? I I don't know. Maybe that's the thing I would say is learn everything you can about every part of this endeavor.
Mm-hmm. I think that's good advice. Well, Harry, thank you so much for your time and your stories.
All right.
The Immortal Icons of Dance podcast is written, produced, and edited by me, Lauren Johnson. Our music is written by Shelby Rassler of Jenkins & Rassler. Technical support is generously provided by Libby Lessenhop.